All right.
Chair Martin.
We will convene now as the work session. We are a little bit late, but that's all right. We'll deal with it as we need to. I think we had an important discussion during the Budget Finance Committee. So we'll begin with the quarterly forecast.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
For this first item, you do have in simply the document that you need to refer to for quarter one and quarter two. And while we will focus on quarter two today, I did want to provide quarter one that captures the topics that have been served at committee meetings, board meetings, and the work session. And we did experience a little bit of delay in getting this to you in the time that we normally do because we were really considering the possibility of whether we needed to revamp this document for your benefit. And while doing that in our discussion, however, we chose to delay that, changing it in its format into possibly the strategic plan. The new strategic plan comes aboard and align it with that rather than go through multiple revisions. So we wanted the quarter one to capture the topics, but quarter two, as you know, quarterly forecast that we try to provide you outlines what are likely topics that will be at a board meeting, a work session, or a committee meeting, just to see the kind of the scope of topics that could occur for those 3 months, and to give you the opportunity that you present this. If there's something that you don't see that you think would be appropriate within that particular quarter that we can add for consideration. So I'll give you a moment to review that and to let us have any feedback that you might want to share with us about anything you see missing for this particular quarter ahead, which takes us through December.
Mr. Grimes, I just want to be clear. I'm still getting it over.
Sure.
Is this just for work session, or is this for committees as
It
well?
could be a topic for work session. It could be a topic for the board meeting or committee meeting.
Okay.
Discussion?
Having previewed the information item on efficiency, I would think we need a follow-up at some point to really be able to delve into some of that information that we're going to hear it today as an information item.
The accountability results?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
And I do believe
Maybe
that
I
is
missed it if
planned.
it's on
That is on the scope of planning for, I know, the Student Achievement Committee to do a deeper dive with
Okay.
regard to those data results. The presentation you will have as an information item is at a broad level for you to get oriented to the results with an opportunity for later to dive deeper. So that should
sounds
be
perfect. Thank you.
reflected somewhere on here in various
Yeah,
parts probably.
Very well might have missed it. Thank you.
It's no different.
Thank you.
So I know we're right in the middle of it, but once it's resolved, I would love an update on our EC transportation situation. I do believe that should be resolved within this second quarter. That probably goes under facilities-ish. Mr. Fletcher?
Well, I'm trying to figure out where anything related to capital investment is.
Closest I could find.
We would be,
Is the closest I could find here.
That
What is that?
fall under
Chief
Operating
Operating
Officer, so I'll revisit that with Mr. Peter.
The CIP.
yeah, we'll be reviewing the foundational decisions to support CIP revision, which happens just after the first of the year.
Well, but this is through December,
Yes.
so, but you're talking about discussions.
We'll be
that
having
happen prior
discussions
to-
about
Okay.
things that are below the level the board's been at before in terms of understanding what goes into the capital plan for new schools and renovated replacement campuses.
Thank you for that. I'll
Really, it's laying the foundation for there's going to probably have to be a bond referendum in 2020. So the
That
foundational
was
work we have to do
the
there.
plan from last year,
That's
several years ago.
Mr.
Yeah.
Fletcher?
Talk a little bit about this around the student achievement piece. I'm not sure where it goes, if it's in the chief academic officer or chief of schools, but the work around the elementary support model, and I guess how that sort of evolving, dissolving, I'm not sure what the word to use, but where we're going with that in terms of how we're providing support to our high needs schools.
Okay.
both of the elementary, middle, and if that, I'm not sure exactly where that sits. I see the restart piece on the chief of schools, and I see the magnet update on the student achievement.
Okay.
I'm looking at Jackie and Kathy like,
I've added something around the practices, the high need school.
so what's happening and how we're providing support to those going forward.
So in facilities, we talked a little bit about sustainability, and I know I was talking to Ms. Cash too in terms of budget impacts, trying to get maybe a little bit of a deeper dive into costs and benefits of different sustainability programs, and that might be a possible topic for finance.
That's something we want to look at deeply.
Okay.
And then I know Ms. Mahaffey isn't here, but I know she had asked during a board session for a deeper look into transportation and bell schedules at some point. And I just wanted to bring that up.
Good job keeping that on the list.
We had agreed that a study was going to be done, but I don't know what the progress is on that, so an update would be in order.
Okay. Transportation specifically around bell schedules. Okay. And I think there was I do remember the conversation because we had it several years ago, and there were some numbers and some data thrown around what the impact would be, what the changes would look like, and so then updating that so that we could have a discussion at this point around what that would look like.
Well, there was a recent one at the board table when it came up, and I think I suggested at the board table that if we had some sort of external study around, we already knew the impact of the research around early starts, late starts,
Right.
aging children, that sort of thing. But I think what I was asking for was, given our three-tier busing system, the size of us, are there other districts around the country or places that have kind of addressed that? And because we sort of hear about what the constraints are for us to make any change, are there in fact any work, any study, any policies around how the effectiveness of that? Because I think we've heard other places where they've tried doing this, but we didn't see any impacts, or just we talk about it every year, but nothing happens.
Well, we agreed last year when we were dealing with the bell schedule Ms. Cash raised that part of our decision was okay, and part of the but was that we needed to do some kind of a more thorough study.
So where are we on that study?
That's the question.
That's the question. Chris had you.
Yeah, we
brought
want
it
to
up.
check on
Chris had you on that one.
what is either been happening or where that is, whether it's a second quarter or third quarter item, just making sure it doesn't fall off the radar.
Okay.
So I don't know if this is appropriate. So there's a couple things that I have been wanting to talk about. I don't know if I'm supposed to bring them up here. But like one thing in policy, how do I get certain policies reviewed? Does it go on here?
So why don't you just raise the issue that way?
Policy would be like the policy about how we give senior exemptions for college visits in all our schools. It's not directed under policy, so every school does it a little differently. I wanted to see if that's something we could be consistent about.
And Dr. Gardner and I are going to get together and do a similar forecast for policy. So I will add that to the list for us to review.
And you reminded me.
I reminded you,
He
sorry.
reminded me. And I'm kind of thinking about giving that up a little bit. But for a few years, I've been wanting to look at the GPA, how we rank our kids as, how we weight their grades for kids that are transferring in. You know. And then I had also a question about, like, is there a place where we can look at maintenance as far as whether we have other options out there on contracting our maintenance out, or how we develop partnerships with, people in the school that maybe we could do some maintenance work on schools that have a huge backlog of work orders. I know we don't have it. I know our staff is
Maybe an
very
M&O
short.
update.
Facilities.
I have found that useful in the past, maintenance and operations overview.
Well,
Because that's some of the most frequent emails
and it's
we
going to be
get.
moving in
Right.
terms of
Put money.
our new CIP next year will have a category that allocates more funding to smaller money projects for schools that will enable some additional maintenance that has not been able to be funded because we were funding everything that was, high level, high need stuff. So there's somewhat of a morphing of that process. It'd be good to have that discussion. Greg Clark and his staff have got all the data we would ever want to have in terms of understanding operational maintenance. And then there's the component of deferred capital investment in a school. Maybe a piece of switchgear is supposed to be replaced in 40 years or 35 years, and 50 years it's still being used. And what does that mean in terms of reliability and whatnot? So that's a discussion I think we could facilitate through facilities.
So would that be a discussion that will discuss some of the safety issues that we're finding in some of our schools right now that probably can't wait for a study or wait for further funding? Maybe we need to set up a way to help let parents deal with those in their schools.
I don't know where the safety committee, the school district's internal people safety committee is going to be, and how those procedures are going to be established to deal with what I think is the level of concern that Roxy is sharing.
So with the establishment of the security committee, that may very likely be an avenue for which some of that will be funneled through, but also it may be coming out through the security risk assessment that's being conducted right now as the assessment teams are on campus as they're looking at facilities, infrastructure, campus sites and all that. Some of that you're speaking to may come out as that as well. But with the deferred list that we already have, that can easily be funneled into that work so that we can kind of see where that may fit both from a facilities committee standpoint as well as with some of the security committee, especially if it impacts safety of the campus.
I think there's I think there's a need for our internal safety committee to figure out what policy you need to support you and procedures for community administrators, board members to share concerns that can be reviewed by that group.
There is a certain part of organizational aspects.
Yes, very much so.
From policy, procedure, communication with the board that needs to be established on the front end.
Absolutely.
For the work. And Brian Ruth and I are in conversation with some of that before even kicking some of the series of meetings off, so that can be from the beginning.
Well, I just want to highlight, having had quite a few conversations with Roxy about this, I would encourage us to have the conversation being more than just about dollars, because oftentimes the M&O kinds of things are, here's the big list, here's what needs to be done, here's what we can't do. And I think I've heard a lot, how do we transition from what can't we do to how can we figure out how to do, number one. And I think a second issue that I've heard you didn't quite mention, but I think is there, is what's our backlog of work orders? We hear bits and pieces about backlogs of work orders or non-responsiveness to addressing them. Where's anecdote? Where's reality? But there's we deal with it with student assignment, with transportation, with everything. So how do we get the customer service aspect of it as well? So a broader discussion, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah.
Isn't that consistent?
Very much.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Other ideas? Issues that you see, don't see?
There's more, but that's an awful lot for the board. So.
Well, I mean, it's good to periodically just sort of get some things on the table that we need to be.
There's a parking lot somewhere.
There's a next quarter somewhere.
Right. I mean, everything we've listed here is not going to be done in the second quarter, but getting it on the table is helpful for planning.
So if I may, Chairman Martin, if I'd like to go through the list just to make sure I've captured everything. I've heard that interest around an update on EC transportation. an update on the capital investment that includes several layers. We've got a number of other things that could go to facilities as well with regard to maintenance, contracting options, especially with backlog orders, deferred needs, informational status of back orders, kind of set in the orientation of how can we figure it out versus just a laundry list of needs attached with dollars, but how can we be proactive in addressing some of that. A bond referendum, setting the foundation for that. A deeper look into transportation and its impact and relationship to bell times with regard to schedule, and even expanding that study to include looking at other districts that are comparable in size with regard to their experiences. A sustainability study with regard to the impact of budget. How are we supporting the schools that have transitioned out of the ESM model and support moving forward with those schools from a policy perspective, and or it may go to student achievement. How we are handling senior exemptions in the district, as well as a closer look at GPA, especially for in the terms of students coming into the district in comparison to students who've been in our district.
Wow. Wow.
Is there something
Especially
in this?
raise the performance and accountability feedback in addition to that. Otherwise,
Yes, I can add that. I think we have that being addressed on our Student Achievement Committee, but Dr. McFarland is here, and I think he also indicated that I think that's scheduled for around November.
Thank you.
Lindsay, is that a hand up, or is that?
No.
Okay. Any other issues?
Only for the future, because this is a full load. But at some point, if we could have a discussion, student health related, about vaping, the increase in vaping, recent hazards associated with it, and what we've done as a system, I think that would be.
I would sort of term that a follow-up, perhaps, to the SHAC recommendations.
Right.
It was toward the board.
And you know, that was an addition to our policy. Right. It was a new addition when we were looking at that policy, so I'll
But
have
seeing
that.
how those changes have impacted, have they made a difference? And then if the use of this product is continuing to rise, is that sufficient?
All right. Not like we don't have a lot of work to do.
Is that good?
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we have two policies that were considered in policy committee meeting. And we had very good and robust discussions around these topics, but decided that rather than just taking it to the board meeting, it was appropriate to have an update here in work session based on the revisions that were suggested. So two policies. We'll start with the public records, retention, release, and disposition.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. As you have said, from policy committee, based on your input and review, the board felt that we may be in a position to take this to first reading at this board meeting with some of the work allotted in this work session to see the changes as noted based on the feedback. So Mr. Simmons is here to kind of walk us through those changes that were recommended, the edits to show you what that looks like now, and then after we look at that, we'll determine whether the board is ready to carry forward with it as a first reading tonight in its regular meeting.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As Dr. Gardner said, I will dispense with the information that was readily agreed to during the last policy committee meeting and skip to changes that had been recommended. The first of which is at the near the bottom of section A, beyond the numbered elements. And I believe in your copy it's in blue, is that correct?
Yes.
If a record contains confidential information as well as public information, school officials must provide the requested public record with the confidential information removed or redacted. This is Jonathan, where you want it.
Yeah, I just have one very tiny add to that, and that would be where it says if a record, we could put in a public record contains confidential information and so on. So I think that's important.
The following sentences also was a change from the draft that was originally considered. And it is additional language. The board may operate in closed session for the limited purposes allowed by law. The following language, minutes and general accounts, etc., was pulled over in total from the School Board Association draft. And obviously that was done to make as clear as possible that there were only limited purposes by which the board could operate in closed session. In section B, which became a new section B, based on the way in which we reworked the policy, there is a section here, the second sentence of that first paragraph, requests may be made to the Office of Communications. I'm not sure why that's not in blue. We brought that over from the original. The first sentence is as written. The school system will respond as promptly as possible in light of the nature of each request. We moved that. That was in a different portion of the draft that we were considering, and we moved it into this section. Other than that, it is as written within the draft that we've considered. And then in that second sentence, second paragraph of section B, we wanted to make explicit that if there was a denial, that any denial must include the information about how to appeal that denial. The next and I think last section that was changed during the policy committee discussion was the first sentence in section C, which I think is a very good addition, particularly from my perspective as representative from the Office of Communications. The board's intent is to make public records accessible free of charge, except in the limited circumstances set forth in this provision. An important note is that it is easy to understand why someone might look at this and see it as restrictive, whereas we see it as permissive. The idea is to provide as many records as possible free of charge, which is the standard generally in school boards around the state and around the country.
Any comments, questions?
I think it captures the lingering discussion from our policy committee. So thank you, Mr. Simmons.
Just for clarification purposes, how extensive can a public records request get, and what is the average length of time it takes to satisfy a public records request?
I don't know that I've ever calculated in the sense of like average when you take. I think I mentioned at our last discussion that over the last 2.5 years have been about 500 public records requests. And I don't know that we calculate them. Some of them are literally less than an hour in and out. A lot of them, as we talked about before, is I want all the bids for paper towels. It's a public record, and we get that request, and that doesn't take very long. We have others that can take years if we don't discuss with the person making the request how to reduce the scope. Those are rare. Those probably would be the types that you're talking about that would be affected by portions of this policy. But on average, vast majority of them, you're in and out in a few hours, cumulatively. It's because you get the request, you pass it to the department does their work to search and produce, they send it back to us. Sometimes it'll have redactions, but oftentimes public record is just it's public in its entirety. Those are pretty short and sweet.
And you're asking how long it takes staff once they get the request and are able to focus on it, not how long it takes from the time of the request to the time the person gets it, because I just don't want to suggest that there's people get it in 2 hours.
Right.
No, because how long it takes until the person making the request gets it back depends in part on how many we have in the queue and the nature of the request. If you ask me for all financial records for a year on a specific topic, that's going to take some searching. And that search will be conducted by employees. We'll guide them through it, but that search is going to be conducted by employees that were doing whatever they were doing before they went wanted to search for the records for the past year on whatever topic. So I don't mean to imply that if you call me at 1 o'clock, I can have your information right through.
Right.
So very
Needed that
Clarifying,
clarification.
Jonathan.
Thank you.
As an anecdote, I had reason to talk with someone connected to the schools in Pasadena, Consolidated School District in Los Angeles area. The school system's staff communication person is full-time public records request.
Chicago
Full-time.
was Department 4, because I was talking to somebody from Chicago. 4.
Ms. Cash?
Just public
Which I think kind of goes along with my question is, how is this distributed? I mean, like, I wouldn't want all the top policymakers and people chiefs and people like that involved in months of record requests because then everything else stops in the area. And so I think we run into that sometimes. How do we distribute that, or do we need to figure out another way of who's going to handle that down a little lower?
It's all coordinated as this policy reflects and as our practice has reflected. It's all coordinated through communications. Generally speaking, if it's media, then it's going to be the director of communications. Those are usually pretty straightforward because the media makes a lot of requests, and so that they kind of have the practice down. If it is individual citizen, that often will go through me and my administrative assistant. We will distribute that to whomever is the keeper of the records, will be collected, and then we'll do the review to determine what may or may not be confidential before we release it. We have always been able, Jonathan and I talked about this earlier today, when I came here, I came to a school system that had always had a strong history of releasing public information and public records. It was what they did, and it's what we've done since then. We've been able to do that without an additional staff member, and I think this particular policy will allow us to, it codifies a lot of the practice that will allow us to continue to keep the information moving, keep the public records moving. Given the needs of the communications department, much like the rest of the district, I'd hate to burn a position just on public records if we don't have to. I'll let you know if we get to that point. You'll probably see it in a business case or something of that nature. But we're kind of right in that spot right now, if that's helpful to answer your question.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we don't usually take votes in a work session, but we do need to decide for sure whether we're going to move this to the full board for a first reading tonight. I'm sensing a yes. I see thumbs to that effect. Do we need a formal motion, Jonathan? No. Okay. So it's not coming formally from the committee, but we've got it on the agenda. Okay.
So we'll move forward for first reading tonight with the addition of that word public in that particular, we'll note that in public tonight.
Thank you.
Well, and that change be made before we get out there, or do you want us to make a motion?
Mr. Simmons can make it as part of the request for first reading that one change.
that one
If you're
change.
satisfied with that, because we will not.
And that way we don't have to make a motion for an amendment version. Okay?
Makes sense.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. The next policy that we looked at was on unmanned aircraft, unpersoned aircraft. And as we noted in policy committee meeting, there are very few drone policies in K-12 school systems. And this probably is the first in North Carolina at least. So that's why it's taken a lot of work. And I think we're to a stage where whatever we land on, we'll probably be looked at significantly by the state.
Well, Dr. Martin, you're true in saying that this is new territory, and I'm so grateful on behalf of the district for the team who has worked on the language for this policy. It's taken many to do that, and we're coming back again tonight based on the feedback that was presented in the last policy committee. Similarly, with the other policy, it's reflected the changes in blue to give you kind of a tracking system to note those changes in the feedback, and Betty is going to walk us through that.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We have added, at your suggestion, a preamble at the very beginning. I trust that yours also has the new changes in blue, so those are readily apparent. The idea was to give a forecast that while we recognize there's benefit, there's also risk, and to make it plain at the very first reading of this policy to any third party that all drone use must comply with the policy. So it sort of sets the tone. From there, in Section A2, we clarified the person or persons responsible for granting access by adding the phrase by the superintendent or superintendent's designee. The previous version just lacked language that was that specific. In paragraph B, we had already identified the laws and regulations that affect this particular activity, but we broadened it to say it has to comply with any applicable laws so that in the event things change going forward, it still has the flexibility to include what we need. Paragraph C, subparagraph 6, this arose from a discussion of the notion of flight plans and notice to the principals. So it added to the use of drones on board policy the need to notify the principal of the date and time. So that's sort of a localized flight plan discussion that was anticipated there. In paragraph D in the second paragraph, we clarified that those drones that needed to be registered with risk management were either owned or used by the school system itself. One thing I would point out, there remains a blank in that paragraph. That's where the link will be added upon approval to the technological standard. So it's not unusual for it to be blank. At this point, it will go into effect when it's ready for publication.
Thank you.
Once it's approved.
Right. Further, in paragraph D at the top of the next page, we added some reference language so that any particular drone use that was there for non-commercial demonstration by parents or community members, we clarified that it comes under the rules for commercial policy. So it was merely a reference to be sure that that unique set of users had clarity as to which provisions affected them. At the bottom of page 3 in section E again, this was a situation where we recognized that news outlets may want to use drones in snow and ice conditions to fly over our sites. So rather than trying to contact the principal who isn't there or a risk manager who may be at home, we wanted to be able to provide some continuing authority as long as they provided updates for that very narrow scope. And that fleshed it out a bit. In F and G, we took the paragraph that was in G that dealt with monitoring inappropriate use of the technology and placed it up in the inappropriate use paragraph. So it just was housed better there. And the idea is to make it plain that there are repercussions for inappropriate use of the technology. Beyond that, there was one, if I could direct your attention back to paragraph B on risks. Mr. Malone has thought a little else since we left our technology
For 10 minutes.
on this paragraph and would like to share his thoughts.
So, and I should have called this earlier, but and I've talked to Jonathan about it briefly. What I'd like to propose would be that the first sentence or first two sentences in that section under risk be deleted. I think I've ultimately concluded I just think it's unnecessary language. It's not necessarily the kind of language that would go in a policy to kind of explain why you're creating a policy, so I don't think you need the language there. So we would propose that those first two sentences be removed and maybe change that section to something like applicable laws and regulations. And then I would probably also delete the words "and risk" in the first line of the preamble.
Can you repeat that again?
You're suggesting start with this as all operators of drones?
Yes, correct. Starting with, yes, exactly. All
Actually,
operators
start with
of
the
drones.
heading being,
Yeah,
Applicable laws and regulations.
right.
correct. And then in the first sentence, the first new sentence, the Wake County Board of Education recognizes the benefits of operating instead of benefits and risk of operating.
But much of the policy details why we don't want drones on campus by others. So I think we need something other than benefits.
There's still risks.
Yeah, we recognize that there are risks, but I think that from a policy perspective, I don't know that we need to point out the risk associated with the use of them as much as to explain the acceptable use of drones on school board property.
So I think we hear, and I will concur, that we need something other than just the benefits, because then it seems open-ended. So, great.
I propose the compromise that you leave the first sentence as is, but delete the sentences under B. That way you mentioned it once about risks, but then we don't reiterate that multiple times, and we get to the meat of compliance, which I think is important. I think that would resolve it.
And basically, we're saying there needs to be some parameters around. There are benefits, but there need to be some parameters around.
Challenges.
How do you deal with the discussion?
Well, I like Mr. Malone's language of, setting out acceptable use of drones and leaving it generic like that, maybe.
Yeah, and Betty was proposing, and maybe we could, instead of "and risk," we could say "and responsibilities," which may be a better way to address what I think you're after. So we could say the board recognized the benefits and responsibilities of operating unmanned.
All right.
If that works.
I was trying to craft something that used responsibility in place of risk, and I think that could work just as well.
Model good behavior.
Spider-Man would like it.
I think it harkens back to something that Dr. Martin said earlier. Instead of telling people up front what they can't do, we look at what
Right.
we can do with some cautionary language instead of starting out with the don'ts. And I think that's sort of the approach that we took with the input that we received from the committee.
Okay.
So then to review, is it the board's desire that when we present this, if it goes forward, that we suggest that the word risks be exchanged for responsibilities in the first sentence of the preamble?
Yes.
And what is the thinking on Mr. Malone's recommendation to delete the first two sentences and change the title to B?
Well, as an alternative, I think you could just replace risks with responsibilities, because you're declaring a responsibility to comply with the various regulations. And each word there, each usage of risks can be, I think, replaced with responsibility and still convey the meaning. Other responsibilities may not be as obvious, such as the possibility, but it's good to include that. So at the risk of pulling out something important, you can still include that that language that originally we talked about in the preamble and then move to this section. Outline what those responsibilities are, I think, is important, but I understand the reason behind Mr. Malone's amendment, and I think if we follow what he said, replacing just risks with responsibilities, even in this paragraph, it should take care of that.
I would
Require a little bit more touching, right? Because you don't pose a responsibility, I don't think. So to require unique responsibilities. Other responsibilities may not be as obvious, such as possibility of criminal charges. That doesn't. I mean, I hear where you're going and respect it, but it's not quite search and replace.
Yeah, I mean, I would really propose that we just delete the first two sentences. I think that in terms of what the board's after in the policy, you capture it all without those two sentences, and I would recommend that we just delete them.
And in part, that's why we put the preamble.
Correct.
That's what.
Correct.
Jonathan's yours to this point, or
I was going to say I'm comfortable with the changes Mr. Malone has proposed.
I will just tell you that when the first time you do a policy, there's a tendency to overwrite. And then over time, you realize, wow, that's an incredibly long policy, and it gets shorter and shorter. This is just an effort to try to get in a little bit more of the meat early on.
Mr. Fletcher?
Well, this is first reading.
Right.
Happy to support Mr. Malone's recommendation. And as we review this in the future, I mean,
On second reading.
on second reading, if we feel we need to add language to it, we can do it and do it well before it goes back to the board.
And I had one other just question for the board and for the team that's worked on this, and it's under
Ms. Parker, you were looking like you were going to say something. Is that germane to where we are, or before we go to next?
Yes, I just wanted to confirm where we are. I understand that we're removing the first two sentences of paragraph B, but there were several options for title changes to paragraph B. I heard responsibilities, I heard applicable laws and regulations. I'm just wondering where we've landed.
I like applicable law and regulations because that's specific and it's clearly a responsibility. But clear, this does a clarity of it.
Good.
So then we'll change the title from risks to applicable laws and regulations. Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank you. So in section F on inappropriate use, and it lists, for examples and so on and so forth, the first sentence in blue says school staff shall monitor for inappropriate use of drones technology as defined in this policy. I mean, the district always has the opportunity to monitor. I'm just wondering whether we want to sort of impose that in policy with a shall. And obviously there's going to be rules about getting the permit to do it and all of that stuff, but sometimes I'm worried that is it over-promising that we've got our drone watching the other drones as they go around to make sure we're monitoring them. So I'm not positive that we need that sentence, but I'll put it to the team as to see whether you all and the board sees it. I just looked at that and thought perhaps it was something that we didn't need to have in policy.
Are you referring simply to the change of the word shall to something else?
I just thought we would take it out. I just thought we'd take the sentence out. Get right to violators. I mean, here's inappropriate.
You don't even need to say violators, right? Inappropriate use of drone technology may be subject to disciplinary action.
Yes.
Well, that works.
I think the discussion was that we previously had some language regarding use appropriateness in the R&P, and there was a desire to pull some of that forward. I think that since the school staff is the one that has to be appropriately licensed for use during the educational uses, and since the principal is the one being contacted, I think when that was drawn, there was probably a presumption that staff, whether it's the risk manager or the principal or the pilots, would be the ones most likely to observe, and it may have conveyed some thought of responsibility for reporting. But
just raising it.
council drafted.
Dr. Levis was.
Well, again, we don't define what monitoring is.
Right. Exactly.
So we generally try to back off from adding to policy things that are not defined.
And with a shall.
So I think if we just land on inappropriate use of drone technology as defined by this policy may be subject to disciplinary action, and then we're good.
That's what we had.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other issues, comments, concerns?
So may we review, just to make sure that we captured everybody's. So in the preamble, we're going to substitute the word risk to responsibilities. We're going to change the header for B to now state applicable laws and regulations, and we're going to delete the first two sentences of that paragraph. Then in section F, we're going to delete that first sentence as is currently stated and now state inappropriate use of drones as defined by this policy may be subject to disciplinary action up to and including suspension for students, and the statement carries forward. Did we capture? And so if the board finds it that we should move forward with first reading. Those changes will be stated tonight in the proposal for first reading and adoption from the board.
Any objection to the first reading? So I guess I was asking a negative. Is everybody in favor of a first reading tonight? All right. We'll have it on for the first reading. Thank you. I think you've completely captured the sentiment of a very good discussion.
Thank you.
For policy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Plowing new ground.
All right, the next item on our work session is a revision of the timeline and items for consideration with respect to the enrollment plan. Glenn, is it Wade? Some combination.
So staff is bringing a revision to the timeline for the 2020-21 enrollment plan. We've been collecting feedback from board members, and so we're looking to just push back the timeline 2 weeks. So when you look at it, today was supposed to be draft 1. We push it back to October 1st. We would still have info sessions. We have currently 1 that we'll schedule for October 24th. We'll look to schedule others if necessary. Draft 2 would then be November 5th. Again, collecting feedback online throughout this entire process from families. From start to finish, I just want to be very clear that it is the exact same number of days had we started today and ended on November 19th. So there is no change in shortening or lengthening the time frame. The only lengthening that we would probably get is through the grandfathering, which I'll get into a second. We'll do a public hearing on November 19th, which was originally the final vote date, and pushing the final vote date to December 3rd. This is not uncommon to years past. We have had generally the final vote in the first week of December, so this isn't anything that's unusual.
Well, and as we noted, just for the board members and the public to remember that November 19th, many of us will be at the North Carolina School Boards Association conference. So it's unlikely we will have a work session that day, and it probably doesn't make sense to have a vote on something as important as the assignment policy on a day where we can't have a work session.
And then grandfathering, which was going to open in early December, the first week of December, will now open on the 11th, and we'll keep that open until the students leave for Christmas break. Any questions or concerns? So based on this information, we will bring draft 1 to you on October 1st during the board work session. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the update.
The only thing we really need to add to our calendar is that October 24th date. Everything else is at a...
Everything else is at a board meeting. And we say info sessions October 24th. If we should decide there needs to be more than one
additional ones.
info session,
Yeah.
then there could be.
But it'll be around that time?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that covers the information directly on the work session. We had a couple items in closed session that we wanted to go ahead and begin to cover. So, need a motion for closed session?
Motion to go into closed session in order to consider confidential personnel information protected on GS 143-318. 11A1A3 and A6 and 115C 319 Tara Reagan IC file number 17005065 and Jocelyn Whitfield IC file number 17002929 and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11A3 and to consult with the attorney employed or retained by the board in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and board and to consult with and instruct board staff and negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on on behalf of the board in negotiation with price and other material terms of a proposed contract for the acquisition of real property in northwestern Wake County area from seller Bailey Baptist Church, approximately 32.83 acre portion of PIN 170799-30-2983.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. All right, we move to closed session. All right, we need to consult.